Hi everybody, welcome back to another Tuesday evening training all about Lightroom. This is the series we're continuing, except for the last few days, and for the upcoming few days I'm actually traveling, so we can't do the normal live YouTube broadcasts that we've been doing live and answering questions live. So this is a pre-recorded video that I'll be editing and scheduling to go live now, Tuesday, at the normal time. Just so that you know, I will be answering questions in the comment section below. So there won't be a live chat today because it's a pre-scheduled video. If you've got any questions, I will be checking the comment section. Just due to traveling, I can't do the live show, but it's a nice opportunity, I think, to showcase something different within the Lightroom mobile app. And we'll hop straight into it. But basically what's going to happen today is, or over the next few days, I'm actually going to go out and shoot some photos with the Lightroom app. So the Lightroom mobile app, when you install it on a mobile device, whether a tablet or a mobile phone, Android or iPhone, there's actually a built-in camera app inside of the Lightroom app. So instead of using your default camera app that comes with your phone, you've got the option of using the Lightroom Camera app that gives you more manual controls on over your camera. So you'll find things like setting ISO, white balance, shutter speeds. On most mobile phones, actually, the aperture is fixed. So it's a fixed aperture for whatever lens you're using on your phone. So that's the one that we obviously can't adjust because it is fixed. But all the other things you can manually adjust, the focus as well. So we'll have a look at how that works, where to find this camera if you haven't used it before. It's quite handy, especially for traveling. I'm obviously taking my DSLR and lenses and things, or actually a mirrorless camera with some lenses on my travels. But I'm expecting to shoot a lot of images actually from my mobile phone because it's just handy, it's convenient. I can carry it in my pocket. For traveling, it's a nice alternative. Very often I find myself without my camera, and actually my mobile phone does really well these days. So this is Lightroom Mobile and the built-in camera. Let's have a look at how it works. Okay, so once you're in Lightroom, you'll see that in any album in Lightroom, right next to where I'm showing you now, there's a little add images icon that you might be used to. That's where you'd be importing things from either your camera roll or from external devices. If you connect an SD card reader or something to your mobile device, you can import images there. Right next to it, there's a little camera icon. A lot of people don't ever use it, but it's actually quite handy. So we'll go to the Lightroom Camera. There we go. So the first time you go in, it will probably actually look something like this, which is very similar to what you'd find in the built-in camera app. Limited control and a couple of handy things already that's different to the built-in app. But if you're looking right next to where I'm showing you now, it says Auto. I'll just drop down this menu so you can see there's also Professional and HDR, or High Dynamic Range. So these are the three modes you can use in the built-in camera app in Lightroom. Automatic mostly does all the exposure and related settings for you, so you don't have to worry about that. Very similar to the built-in camera apps in your phone that you get with it already installed. And if you switch it to Professional, you get some more manual controls. You'll see the whole display change and a lot of new options appear. We'll ignore that for now and just also go to HDR. If you're in HDR mode, High Dynamic Range mode, it will do automatic HDR. So it will do multiple exposures and combine the images to give you an HDR image. So if you're normally, or if you're used to shooting HDR with your larger camera as well, you can do it automatically and also do the processing inside that. Let's just go back to automatic for a second. We'll look at all the other settings and then go to the professional one as well after that. Shutter button, the big white one right here, next to where I'm showing, so that obviously will just take an exposure. Below that, we can swap lenses. So I can go to ultra wide. So this is an ultra wide view, and my normal wide. So this is the normal lens that we've been used to for many years in our mobile phones. Some of the newer ones, like this iPhone that's not too old, has got an ultra wide lens. And also some of the very new professional sort of edition mobile phones will also have a zoom or a telephoto lens that you can switch to inside the app. Below that, we can actually lock exposure. You'll see the little lock open up or close. Once you've locked exposure, even if you change what the camera is seeing, or if stuff goes darker or lighter, or if you tilt it up to the brighter sky or to a darker area, the exposure won't change. If this is unlocked, it will automatically readjust your exposure as you change your framing, or if the conditions, the lighting conditions change, it will change. That's quite handy if you maybe tilt it up to the sky, you want to expose for the clouds. You can lock the exposure, tilt it down, and it won't blow out your sky, for instance. And yeah, so it's a handy little feature. Below that, we get all the sort of built-in filters or presets, because it's Lightroom, so we'd probably call it presets rather. This very first one is no preset. The second one is high contrast, so it just gives you more contrast. This is a flat preset, so if you're going to be doing a lot of editing afterwards, you could do flat. This is warm shadows, high contrast black and white, so if you're going for a bit more of a film look, high contrast black and white. And a flat black and white, so a flat monochrome sort of preset. The one thing with these, or if you're shooting, and I'll show you now, but you can change between JPEG and RAW. If you're shooting RAW, it's like shooting RAW with your DSLR. You can change these presets and they're not baked in. They are applied to your photo, but you can roll them back or choose something else. If you're shooting JPEG, these presets will be built into the JPEG, and that's your image that you'll be capturing. So that's just a side note there. We'll go back to no preset. Then we'll be moving along to the other side of the screen. Obviously, the little cross in the corner will close the camera. We'll go back to the normal Lightroom album view. Then we've got our flash, so we can put flash on auto, on or off. In general, for most cases, I prefer my flash to be off for my mobile phone. I really don't like using it, but there are extreme circumstances sometimes where it's better having the flash on than not getting an image. So it is there. You can use it. Then below that, we've got this little button that says DNG. So if you press this DNG button, you can switch it over to JPEG or back to DNG. So the DNG is your raw file that this app can do. So if you leave it on DNG, you're shooting RAW with your built-in camera on your mobile phone, which is quite nice, being able to do RAW. On many versions of the iPhone, the built-in camera app won't allow you to shoot RAW, whereas the Lightroom app will actually give you access to saving RAW images, which is quite nice if you're going to be editing in Lightroom. Some of the new modern iPhones will actually give you the RAW option in the built-in camera app, but like I said, a lot of them won't, and you can actually access it here. What also happens is sometimes one of the cameras or one of the lenses on the back, if you've got multiple lenses, some of them might allow you to shoot RAW or save RAW from that lens. Some of them won't. In this case, on my specific model, my ultra wide will only save a JPEG. My normal wide lens will allow me to switch RAW or JPEG. So that's something to know. Then obviously you've got the little front back camera switch button in the corner, bottom right hand corner on my screen. That'll just switch to selfie view like this, or back to the front facing cameras. Yeah. Then the last one, there's 3 little dots. Don't forget those in the corner of the display. And if you press that, like right in the corner, another little menu pops up and you can go. The first one gives you the aspect ratio. So I can switch to 16:9, 3:2, 4:3, or 1:1. And these are just different aspect ratios that the camera can shoot. So depending on what I prefer, I can do different frame sizes. 16:9 like the movies would do, for instance. I like 4:3 because I use a mirrorless micro four thirds system usually, so it just matches the same aspect ratios, and I can match what I'm shooting with my big camera with my mobile phone. Okay, that's just my preference. Then you've got a self timer there. That's the next button. You can switch it off. You can have a 2-second, a 5-second, or a 10-second self timer. Okay, then we can get the grid. You can have no grid. You can have a cross just to show you the center of your screen. If you need to get something right in the center, you can use something like this. Let me just switch it off. You'll see I've got a cross right in the center. You can get your thirds grid where it shows you the thirds lines. So if you're doing things like framing for rule of thirds, that's quite handy. What I also like is even if I'm not going to be using rule of thirds, it's also nice to just level out your horizon or anything that should be level. It's nice having a couple of lines on the screen. So even when I know for a specific shot, I might be going for symmetry or something where I'm not using rule of thirds, it's just nice having some lines to make sure I'm not tilting my phone or something like that. Okay. There's some other rules, like a golden rule grid. I don't use that very often. I just prefer rule of thirds, but it's all about composition rules that you can use. And if you just want to level out a horizon or level out your phone, you can also use this little grid level that will switch on the level. So it will tell you tilting or rotating sideways when your phone is actually level this way, and also like tilting front and back. You can level everything out to get a perfectly level view on whatever you're photographing. So that's another nice little thing to switch on or off. And you can have the little built-in spirit level with rule of thirds if you want. So that's quite handy as well. I'll just leave those two on for now. Then below that, you've got this little triangle pyramid looking thing. That shows you clipping. So right now the highlight clipping is hidden, so it's off. And if I press it again, there's a little line next to it and it says show highlight clipping. When we come to setting the exposure, I'll show you what that does and what it looks like. Below that, you've got your settings. So you can set it to max screen brightness, so which means every time you come into the camera, it will automatically go to max brightness. So if you're shooting outside in bright daylight, it might help you to just see what's happening on the screen better, because obviously there's no viewfinder you can use. It's all on the screen. You can tell it to Geotag Photos, so it will put the GPS coordinates into the image, into the metadata, so you know where you took the photo, which is sometimes nice if you're scouting locations or traveling. Then the actual location is then baked into the metadata, and you can see where that image was taken. Like on some apps will show you on a map or something like that. And if you're using the HDR mode, you can also tell the camera to save the unprocessed original. So it will save the HDR version, the processed one, as well as just the normal actual unprocessed image. Okay, so you get both of those versions. That's the settings. And then we can just tap the little 3 dots again to make that menu disappear. Next, we'll go into the professional camera that's built in, which is right over here. In the drop down, we'll go to professional. Just a note, we're not going to do the HDR one. That's just, you just switch it to the mode and use it like any of the other ones. You just get an HDR processed image out at the end, which doesn't really change how we're using the app. The professional mode is for me the most interesting one because the more automatic mode, I can just use the built-in camera app for the phone and it does a very similar job. And I can then import those images to Lightroom if I want to edit those JPEGs. But this professional mode just gives me a lot more control. So in tricky circumstances, when I really want control over the camera, this is the mode I'd be using. And this is why I would be using the Lightroom Camera to start with, is to get to these sort of settings in conditions where I want this control. So now with the Pro camera selected, we've got a whole row of new icons that appeared. And this is exactly where we get all this extra control over the mobile camera that we would normally not expect in a mobile device, but sort of settings we expect in our bigger cameras. Okay, so the very first one at the top is we're going to look at exposure. And this is just exposure compensation like you would find on your other camera. And we can slide the slider to overexpose, and you'll also see those little zebras appear at the bottom of the image and in some of the highlight areas. So previously we've switched on the highlight clipping, showing the highlight clipping setting, which was under that little 3 dots with a little triangle or pyramid looking thing. Because that's on now, when I'm overexposing some areas of this image by doing exposure compensation plus 2 stops, it's showing me that I've got highlight clipping, which is quite handy with those little zebra lines running across those areas. So it's showing me where I'm getting clipping, and it's also showing me that I am actually getting clipping. So we can lower this exposure again and get rid of that clipping. The center is sort of the auto exposure level that we would expect. And if we go the other way, we can actually underexpose, let's say by 1/3 of a stop in this case, if we wanted to do that. Maybe to preserve detail in the sky or something, we can do something like underexpose. We're just going to leave it at 1/3 under for now. Then the next manual setting we get access to in professional mode is it's the shutter speed. So right over here it says second, and it's just, yeah, like I said, it's the shutter speed. Moving this little slider all the way to where it says auto with the little dots are, keeps it on auto, so the phone camera will decide what the best shutter speed is, and it will just automatically do that for you. But if you want control over that to get a specific effect or a specific shutter speed or a specific exposure, we can also slide that around. So as we slide it, if we start sliding it over, we get to the manual exposures, and we can slide it around and slide it down. And what's happening is we're actually slowing down this exposure to a place where we've got 1 second exposure with a lot of overexposed areas, because 1 second for these conditions is obviously overexposed. We can move it down and do 1/200th if we want to. We can move it to 1,000th of a second. So we can get any shutter speed really that we would want to set. Like I said, the f-stop or your aperture is fixed for this lens camera combination in your phone. So that's generally not something you can actually change. The next one we've got is ISO. So we can also get control of our ISO, and from 32 I think is the lowest I can get on this camera, and I can increase my ISO to whatever I want. That's ISO 800. So if I wanted to fix that, I can then also go back to my shutter speed. So now my ISO is fixed, my aperture is fixed, and I'm controlling my exposure by just moving my shutter speed. So that's quite a handy way. So then I've got full control of my exposure. I can move that back to auto if I want. I can move my ISO back to auto if I want. And now the phone will decide again what the correct exposure will be. White balance, I've got auto white balance, and I've got all the different options for for white balance that I can set. I can also put a piece of white paper or anything behind, and I can set my white balance to a custom white balance if I want to sample. Let's just go back to auto white balance, and we're back there. So that's a nice thing to override as well for different conditions. Maybe it's cloudy, sunny, whatever, and you can override your white balance. Then the next one down, this is our focus. So right here, we can actually manually focus at different spots like you would manually focus a lens. Before we do that, I just want to show you the other way. In any of the camera modes, if you don't set the focus or lock the focus, you can actually tap on the screen. So right now I can actually tap there at the back, or I can tap at the front. That little block will actually will change my exposure, but it will also change. So let's say we focus on the table here. Now it's exposing and focusing right there on the table in the front. What I can do as well is we can lock it right there, and now it's locked in. So you see the yellow little frame? I just pressed and held my finger on that little block, then it locks. So even if my phone moves, my exposure and focus is now actually locked in. If I go back, let me just show you. If I go back to the automatic mode of the camera, I can also tap on the back. So now it's exposing and focusing on the back. I can tap on the front and it's exposing and focusing on the front. I can expose and focus on the table if I wanted to. And if I wanted to disconnect the exposure and the focus, I can just press this little lock button to lock my exposure. So now my exposure is locked for the table, which means I'm not going to be overexposing the table if I move my focus to other spots in the image. I'm still exposing for the white table, where previously if I went to the clock in the back and I unlock my exposure, if I go to the little bunny in the front, which is darker in color than the rest of the image, if it's exposing and focusing on the bunny, then the table gets these blown out highlights on it. So let's go back to the table, lock the exposure. So now I know my table is going to be exposed perfectly. I can go back and move my focus to the bunny. Now I'm focusing on the bunny, but exposing still for the table, which means we're getting a better image. And as I tap around, I can shift my focus. So that's quite nice to be able to do. Let's go back to the professional camera just to show you how we can do manual focusing there. So right over here, we're in autofocus mode right at this moment. But what we can do again is let's expose for the table. I'm going to move my exposure just down by a third. Right now, our little block is on the table. I'm going to lock my exposure there. So now my exposure settings for seconds or shutter speed and ISO are both grayed out. So I can't set them because I've locked my exposure. I'm happy with doing that. Now what we're going to be doing is just moving our focus, but not automatically like tapping on the screen. We're going to be doing it manually, so manually focusing. Right here where it says auto and with a little focus dot, I'm going to click on that. And slowly we can go out of the auto focusing and we can move the focus of the mobile phone camera around. So let's do that. What you'll also see is automatically if I go to manual focus, we'll get peaking. Peaking is just a way for the display to show you what's actually in focus, and it just highlights the edges of things that's actually in crisp focus. So it's an aid or a guide to show you the focus. A lot of mirrorless cameras will also do focus peaking. So it will either do red or green, and usually you can actually change the color in your camera. So if you're using old vintage lenses or manual focus lenses, or if it's a tricky situation and your autofocus is not focusing, you can switch your lens or your camera to manual focus and manually focus your lens. Use peaking to actually see where you're focusing to help you adjust especially if you're looking through a small viewfinder or a small back screen, you can't always exactly tell what's in focus. Peeking will give you a better idea. So we've got the same on the phone. As soon as we switch to manual focusing, you'll see the little green highlights or edges around things that's coming into focus. So I'm slowly going to drag my focus, and you'll see those green highlights right now on the bunny. So I'm front focusing on the first object. And as I move and shift my focus to the back, you'll see those green highlights on the clock in the back, and moving all the way back to behind these objects. So we can basically decide where we want to focus. Right now it's on the clock. If I come forward with the focus, now it's on the bunny. Clock, bunny. So that's a really nice thing that you can also do, is actually override the focus and lock it there. So right now it's focused in that spot, and it will stick there until I put it to a different one or I move it back to auto. And then you've just got at the bottom of all that, all these settings, you've got a little button for resetting everything that you changed. So if you apply a preset or change any of these settings, you can then also go ahead and reset everything back to the original, usually the auto settings, and then carry on from there. So yeah, that's the built-in Lightroom camera. We're going to be shooting outside a bit, and I'm going to record my phone screen to just show you how I approach different situations with it. And then we're also going to be doing a couple of edits of some of those photos, but keeping to the spirit of shooting with a mobile phone, I'm also going to be editing it on my mobile phone. So you can see how the Lightroom actual editing works on a small phone screen. Everything is the same between the different versions of the new Lightroom, whether it's the online one or on an iPad or even on a laptop. All the features are pretty much standard on all the different versions, so you'll find that you can do the same things. It's just on a mobile phone they had to move things around a bit to make it all fit on the small screen, and so it's just the way it's organized is a little bit different, but everything is still there. Great. So let's have a look at taking some images and then the edits. Okay, great. Now that we've seen a lot of the settings and how the camera app works, we can get out and take some images. And again, I'm going to show you my screen recording, and I'm going to talk you through what I'm doing in that scenario to get the images. So this is location 1. I am tapping focus on the little bench to get the bench in focus, reframing a little bit to get that distracting dead tree out of the way. I've set my shutter speed and ISO to fix my exposure, and that's the frame. There we go. This is the second location. You'll see me set the shutter speed to get a fast enough shutter speed, because some waves are breaking on the right hand side to the back of that rock, and I want to freeze the spray coming off that. So I'm going for a pretty fast shutter speed. My ISO is fixed, and aperture on mobile phone cameras are usually a fixed value, so that means my exposure is fixed. Changing the white balance to cloudy just to get the colors in the sand correct. Now it is basically just waiting for the correct moment when this wave hits the back of that rock and the spray comes off the right of it, together with the reflection in the front. That will give us the correct image. It might be a little bit overexposed, but I'm shooting raw, so I can fix that after. Great. Now that you saw me take some images out in the garden route where I'm traveling, I'm going to show you how I edit those images on my phone, on my mobile device, because in the spirit of traveling and traveling light, and using the phone as my main camera in this case, I think editing also on the phone is in the spirit of things, and being able to share quickly and also not lug around big devices to just edit on.
Great, so we'll start editing our first image. As you can see at the bottom, we've got all our normal toolbars that on the other versions of Lightroom we'd find on the side. I'm just hopping into cropping to straighten out my horizon a tiny bit. I am trying auto, but I'm not quite happy with the results, so I'd rather go into the light panel and do the adjustments manually. Double tapping gives me the histogram. I'm dropping the exposure a bit to get some cloud detail back. Increasing the contrast. Dropping highlights. Again, to get some cloud detail in the clouds back. Raising the shadows a tiny bit. Going down more with my highlights, just double checking my shadows. Now I'm opening up the whites, or pushing the whites to the right and going down with my blacks. I'm holding the screen to see when I start clipping. We're hopping over to color, making everything a little bit colder. Adding a bit of tint as well, just to get my white balance to be a bit more cold. I'm dropping saturation and then increasing vibrance, just to get a bit more color into the image. I'm mainly using vibrance for getting color into it because I don't want to increase the colors that are already too bright. We're going to color grading, and I'm warming up my shadows so the darker areas will have a warmer tint. My midtones I'm cooling down a bit towards the blue. My highlights I'm also cooling down towards the blue. I'm going to color mixing, and I'm just looking to adjust the foliage color of those bushes in the front, get them to be a bit less bright green. So I'm just adjusting the yellows and the greens to just isolate the colors in that foliage and just try to get them to be, like I said, less bright green, maybe a little bit more bluish, and tone down a bit. Putting in some texture and clarity. Nothing else here. Detail, so we're doing a bit of sharpening as well, but I'll push my masking up a lot to try and not sharpen my clouds. Holding the screen to see the masking. I'm trying to sharpen the foreground without really sharpening the clouds as much or at all. A tiny bit of noise reduction, although I don't think it's really necessary for this one. Doing a bit of masking just to isolate the sky. In a future training session, we'll look just at masking. So we'll be able to, I'll show you how masking works and all the different settings. But right now, it's the first time on my phone I'm using Select Sky. I usually edit on my iPad or my laptop. So the first time you run Select Sky, it just has to set it up. So on this phone, I haven't done it before. I've done it on my previous phone, but it's the first time running on this one. So I did the setup. Now it selected the sky, and I can adjust the sky without affecting the rest of the image. Dropping the exposure a tiny bit more. Dropping the sharpness as well, because I think I sharpened the clouds a little bit, so I'm trying to compensate for that. Clouds shouldn't be sharp, they should be fluffy and soft. So I'm going negative on DA, so it's actually adding a bit of haze, and that should also give me make the clouds a bit more fluffy. So I'm taking texture away on the clouds. Previously I've added it in the foreground or on the whole image. I'm just compensating for that, dropping the exposure a bit more just to get my clouds to look good. The negative DAs introduced a little bit of brightness in the sky. So this is our second image. Let's see what we can do. As you can see, it's a tiny bit overexposed like we previously said, but it is a RAW, so I should be able to get a lot of the detail back. Looking at my histogram, it's pushed up to the right. So the first thing is dropping my exposure quite a bit, get my exposure values better and get some sky detail back. So we're just playing around in the light panel to get our exposure values correct. Now I'm adding contrast. Highlights a tiny bit down. Shadows we're going to open up a tiny bit, not too much. Whites, I'm touching the screen again on the image to adjust whites, and same for blacks. So just before clipping on the whites and just clipping a tiny bit on the blacks. It's looking better already. I'm going to change my color profile as well, so I'm just looking for the Adobe landscape one. I think the Adobe landscape colors are actually quite good when you're doing landscape, so I'm just switching the color profile. It is RAW, so I can actually switch the color profile. With JPEG you can't. Again, going back to select sky, so I can isolate the sky and adjust that without affecting the rest of the image. So this is the new AI masking tools, which is quite nice. Like I said, we'll do that in a future session, but they work well. Dropping the exposure, now this is just for the sky. Increasing a bit of contrast there, get a bit more moody sky. That's looking quite good. Nice and moody image, I think. Straightening my horizon a bit. With the angle I took this image, it's tricky to get the exact straight horizon, but we're getting close there. Got a nice silhouette on the a reflection on the bottom, which I like. Tweak the colors a little bit, so temperature tiny bit down. Going to introduce some vibrance again and go down with saturation. So again, the effect of increasing vibrance, decreasing saturation means we're adding more color in the areas that's got more toned down colors, and not increasing the color in the areas with very bright colors. Okay. Now we're just introducing a tiny bit of sharpening, and I'm masking so that I'm not sharpening my clouds at all. Great, that's looking good. Let's have a look at some of the final results. So in the first image, I just saw when I was editing the video that the sky was a little bit too blue, so I just toned it down. Have a look at the sky now. There, so that's my final version, just took a bit of the blue out. I'm happy with that. This is the second image, quite happy with how that came out. Hi everybody, thank you for watching all the whole video in this case. Thank you for joining for this travel edition of the Lightroom training series.
and I'll see you back next week for normal live Lightroom training as per the previous videos, and make sure to join in for those.